Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're just going to wait for everyone to join the webinar today. So thank you for joining us. We've got a fantastic attendance today. We're obviously very excited to learn all about white storks. So very grateful for Lucy presenting today. Right, we have 50 people live in the webinar, so welcome everybody. Just a few sort of housekeeping things beforehand. Firstly, I'd like to welcome Lucy Groves, who's the project officer for the Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust. We are very excited to have you here today, Lucy. Thank you very, very much. And I'd like to introduce my lovely co-host, Emma Rothwell, as well. Who will be my backup technical guru for today, as today of all days my internet is playing up, so I do apologize in advance for any interruptions, but Emma will be there to pick up the pieces if I'm screaming in the background at my internet provider. So without further ado, I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping and say that we will be having a Q&A at various times throughout the presentation, and Lucy will indicate when this will happen. There is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen on the black bar that just runs right across the bottom. Just simply click on that and it will come up with a sort of pop-up box, and you type your question in there and then hit send, and we will receive your question, and either myself or Emma, depending on my internet, will be reading out the questions to Lucy. I hope you all have a fantastic time with us today, and thank you so much for your support. With that, I'm going to hand over to Lucy. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Sophie. Right, I'll just share my screen. Hopefully you can all see this. So yeah, just a quick overview of the presentation. So I'm going to be talking about the project itself, the ecology of white storks and how the reintroduction is being done, and an overview of the post-release monitoring. We've then got a little break for some questions if anyone's got any. And then I'll be talking about our milestones from last year and this year as well. They've had two very exciting years for the project. And I'm going to be talking a little bit more in depth about some of the data that we've received, some of the journeys of the storks, and also a bit about the research that we're undertaking. But before I get started, I wanted to introduce myself properly. So my presentation is not working. There we go. So I'm Lucy Groves. I'm a conservation biologist, and I have an interest in animal behaviour and movement ecology. I'm an ex-zookeeper, and I've worked on many projects across Sussex and also in Surrey as well, mainly with a focus on small mammals. I have done a lot with harvest mice in particular, as they're one of my specialities. I've done a lot of public engagement, quite a few talks, and lots of work with volunteers. I'm a safari guide at NEP as well, at the NEP Rewilding Project, and that's where I got into working with the white storks. And I currently work for Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust as the project officer for the White Stork project. So my role within the project is overall coordination. So I coordinate the project and the different partners that we have involved. I also provide support for our 3 release sites, mainly here at NEP, which includes some day-to-day care of the storks themselves, and I ensure that high welfare and husbandry standards are met by all of the sites. I do all of the post-release monitoring, including the GPS tracking data and sightings data that comes in via the general public, so lots of citizen science data. I do all of the public engagement for the project, and this includes working with local groups, talks and walks. I was due to be actually at Surrey Wildlife Trust today, but it's nice to be able to speak to such a large number of you today. I also do all of the press and the social media, but I also coordinate our volunteers as well, which we really couldn't do the project without our wonderful volunteers. So about the project itself, so the White Stork project began in 2016, and it's a partnership of private landowners and conservation charities. And the aim of the project is to establish a self-sustaining free living population of white storks here in the southeast of England by 2030. We'd like to have between 30 and 50 pairs breeding down here in the southeast by then. The core area is around the net rewilding project here in West Sussex, and initial releases to establish local breeding populations have already been undertaken. We are releasing captive bred juveniles as well, so that's being done over 5 years, and we started last year and it will continue till 2023. And one of the main reasons for using white storks is to use them as an emblem for nature connection, to get people re-engaged with nature and help drive pro-conservation behaviour change. So we have a number of partners that are involved in the project, and I just want to talk to you a little bit about what each of them do. So, like I say, the main area for the project is the Nepcastle estate here in West Sussex. And the Stork project is actually the brainchild of Charlie Burrell and also Reggie Hayworth from Cotswold Wildlife Park. It's their idea. And the main site is I call it the nucleus for the project. We've got a large enclosure. It's the key area for the breeding population, and it's our main release site. We also have 2 other sites as well. So we have Wadhurst Park in East Sussex, which is about a year behind where Nep is. Again, they've got a large enclosure and they have some free-flying birds there as well at the moment. And then we have Wintershall, which is in Surrey. It's in Bramley. And they are another year or so behind again. Quite a lot smaller population there at the moment, but I know that you do have some flying around Surrey at the moment. The Cotswold Wildlife Park is a really important partner in the project, and they run our captive breeding programme. So they provide all of the offspring that get released each year. They have all of the expertise in the care and husbandry of white storks. They've had them in their collection for many years now. So they are our husbandry experts and provide us with lots of support. Walsall Zoo were one of the really early partners in the project, and this is where we sourced all of our original storks from. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the different storks that we've got over the last few years in just a little bit. The Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation is another of our important partners, and they are specialists in large-scale reintroductions. So you might know them from the work they've done with osprey over the last few decades, but also more recently the white-tailed eagles on the Isle of Wight. So we work with Tim McCrill from the project, and they help support us with the reintroduction from a species point of view, but also from the human interaction side as well. And then we have Durrell. So Durrell joined the project in 2018. So we're relative new partners. We came into an already established project. But we were brought in to help with overall coordination, and we specialise in saving species from extinction, but also a lot of post-release monitoring. So that's kind of the science side is what we're really key for. But also they provided funding for the project officer role. So before then, we didn't have anyone as the face for the project, so that's my job. So I have established a lot of engagement, and it's really important that we get our local communities, our schools, and also the general public involved in the project. So one of the main questions I get is why white storks? There's a number of reasons. They're a large, easily recognisable and charismatic species. So lots of different reintroductions were talked about. The usual things, beavers, which is happening across the country anyway, but other things like lynx and wolves and bears and other things like that. And although that could possibly be done, it brings up a lot of questions and it's not particularly easy. The white storks are fantastic species. Everybody can recognise the stork. They have a real history of being alongside people, living alongside people across their range in Europe. They actually nest on people's roofs and in villages, and they're a huge part of their culture and heritage. And even here in the UK, they're still a big part of our culture. We've all seen images like this. We know that storks bring babies. And one of the reasons for this sort of myth and legend is that couples would wed during the summer solstice celebrations. And at that point, our storks would still be here. They'd then vanish for the winter, returning about 9 months later when quite a few babies would also be turning up. So that's one of the theories behind where that story has come from. But even today, it's still something that we're aware of. You know, baby cards around the country have storks on, and even in modern day, it's something that we know about. I spoke to a midwife a year or so ago now, who said that the birthmarks that babies get on their nose and on the back of their neck are actually called stork bites. And even talking to young couples, it instantly clicks that yes, storks bring babies, and that might be left over from the stork delivery. They're a sign of good luck and prosperity across their range. They're a signal of seasonal change. So because these storks return to their nests every single year, these people with nests on their roofs get really attached to their stork families, and it's a sign of spring when they return, and they look forward to them coming back. The organisation Eurinature has actually been awarding villages and towns with the title of Stork Village for areas that are working really hard to conserve the species and raise awareness. And this is actually not just helping support the storks, but it's creating ecotourism for those local communities as well. Although the storks are not a keystone species, they're not going to make a massive impact on habitat themselves, unlike things like your beavers, that, you know, ecosystem engineers, that, you know, beavers create a lot of habitat. But the storks themselves have been used in reintroductions across Europe. They've been reintroduced into 8 other European countries. And one of them, or a couple of them, especially the one in Sweden, has actually used the stork as a flagship species for wetland creation and restoration. And that is what we're hoping to replicate here in the UK, help engage and inspire people, and increase their knowledge and experience and the want to conserve and protect nature around them. So we also have a history of storks here in the UK. There's archaeological evidence from about 130,000 years ago from caves down in Devon. The evidence suggests that storks were not just rare visitors here to the UK, but they were regularly seen and occasionally bred here in the UK. The last written evidence of this was from 1416, when they famously nested on St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. Now, that would have been quite an unusual sight to have them so far north, which is possibly why it was written down, but they were regularly seen. There's evidence of them in artwork, in writing. They were eaten at medieval banquets across the UK. They appear throughout literature over hundreds of years. There's evidence of them in place names around the country as well, especially places nearby. Here in Sussex, the local village of Storrington appeared in the Domesday Book as a Storcheston, which means homestead of storks, and they still have the white stork as their emblem today. Although there were regular sightings of them, Rare Birds Britain recorded storks between 1958 and 1983. But because they were seen so regularly, they were taken off the list, and no further sightings were officially recorded, although many of them were still sighted. We get about 20 or 30 visiting the UK every year, so they're quite regularly seen. But although they're seen quite often and we've got suitable habitat for them, due to their strong breeding ecology, they return to the same nests every year. They nest in colonies. Once those areas are lost, they may come to the UK, but they won't necessarily stay to breed. And it was decided that they wouldn't likely return as a breeding species without a little bit of help. So just to go into a little bit about white stork ecology so that you can get a real idea of these birds. So they're a large, distinctive wading bird. They stand at over 1 metre tall and they have nearly a 2 metre wingspan. Adults have these lovely red bills and legs, which actually flush to a real bright red during the breeding season. Juveniles hatch with black bills. As they get older, towards the end of their first year, those bills will turn red. You can see the picture on the top left. This is one of our juveniles from this year, and you can see the tip of the beak is still slightly darker. Males and females look really similar. It's very difficult to tell the difference between the two. I've spoken to some experts and even they struggle. The males do have a slightly thicker set bill, but very, very difficult to tell otherwise. They are monogamous, so they'll spend the breeding season together. They split off during migration and over the winter months, and usually return to the same nest and pair up again with the same partner. Not always the case. If one of them should be late coming back or not returning at all, they will find another mate to partner with. But they re-establish their pair bond with what is called an up-down display and bill clattering. I've got a video here, and hopefully, if I've got all of my settings correct, you should be able to hear the sound. So that gives you the display, and this is done to each other. It's done to warn off others as well, and even just a day or so after hatching, the chicks will be making this bill clattering sound as well. So they nest in groups. They are gregarious. They like to nest colonially. The more experienced and older birds get the best spots, so higher up, nearer the centre of the colony. Younger, less experienced birds tend to be on the fringes. Like I say, they use the same nest every year, and they will repair it and build on it each year, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And some of them are generations old, and they can become really large. I've seen a photo of one which is nearly 2 meters deep. It looks quite precarious on the top of a building, but they're actually really structurally sound. So yeah, they build on it every single year, and they will make sure that it's all nice and safe. It's made out of lots of different sticks, and they will actually line the inside of it with grass and other things that they can find. So here at Net in particular, they go around looking for where the pigs have been rootling and turning over the soil and the turf, and they take the top bit of turf off and pop it into the nest and make it all nice and soft on the inside. But these nests are fantastic habitat for other species as well. This photo here actually shows lots of different types of sparrow using the same nest. So we've got 3 sparrows, house sparrows, tree sparrows, and also Spanish sparrows, all using the same nest. And in other areas, lots of different species have been known to use them, parakeets and starlings. There's also some anecdotal sightings of kestrels and things like that using them as well. So once the pair have established their bond, they will mate and lay, the female will lay 4 to 5 eggs, and these are laid at 2-day intervals. The incubation starts as soon as the first egg has been laid, and both male and female will sit and incubate the eggs, taking it in turns. About 33 to 34 days later, the chicks will hatch. So again, this happens asynchronously. So this happens almost every other day. So there's a size difference and age difference with those chicks. So with other species, you get quite a lot of competition, especially by these older birds. And in species like barn owls, the older birds may even end up eating those younger siblings. But that's not something that really occurs here with white storks. So when they're feeding the chicks, The male and the female both do the feeding, and they'll regurgitate food into the center of the nest, not directly to an individual chick. And this means that most of the chicks will actually get a good opportunity to feed. They'll fledge at about 60 to 70 days later, and they will go on their first migration late summer that same year. They do their first migration at only a few months old. They don't tend to return to their nest site until they are about 3 to 4 years old, when they're about ready to breed themselves. And they can actually live up to about 30 years old in the wild, and in captivity, much longer than that. So habitat-wise, they prefer areas of open wetland, particularly grassy areas which are wet and periodically flooded. So riverbanks, marshes, floodplains and wet meadows are ideal habitat for them. They avoid areas which have greater woodland cover. They'll use the trees to nest in, but they won't actually forage or anything through any woodland, unlike their cousins, the black stork. Whilst they're migrating, they use savannas and dry grasslands across their migratory route. And actually, over recent years, they actually use landfill sites quite often as stopping points and areas to find food. So feeding-wise, they're really adaptable, and they will eat a wide range of food, but a large proportion of that diet is made up from insects, beetles and crickets. 30% of their diet can be made up of just earthworms, but they will also follow locust swarms whilst they're migrating and in their overwintering sites. But whilst they mainly focus on insects, they'll eat a wide variety of other species too, including fish, amphibians, reptiles and small mammals. And their hunting strategy is to just stalk through grassland. So they'll be wandering through the grassland or through wetlands, and basically just picking up anything that they come across. They don't focus on a particular species. They don't go out looking for something in particular. They're just very opportunistic. If something catches their eye, they will give it a go. I've seen one photo of one of them trying to eat a whole rabbit, and similar to the herons, they will take quite large prey. When they're nesting, they actually forage within just 5 kilometres radius of the nest, and will mainly focus on things around those areas. But they are really highly adaptable, and as I say, they've been using landfill sites across their range, and especially in Europe, where there's quite a high proportion of organic matter at these landfill sites. There are actually some populations have stopped migrating because there is food availability all year round. So they're actually even nesting and rearing young on these landfill sites. So storks have actually been really important for learning about migration. They were important learning that actually birds did migrate. Aristotle thought that storks and other bird species that disappear over the winter months actually go to the bottom of the sea or large lakes. And there was a paper written in 1703 which described storks flying to the moon for the winter. But in 1822, a stork arrived in Germany with an African spear through its neck. This was the first evidence that these birds were making long distance journeys. This stork had flown all the way from Africa with a spear through its neck to Germany, only to be shot down so that they could have a look at the stork. But yeah, so this was the first proof that they were traveling these long distances. Over 25 other arrow storks have been recorded since this first one in 1822. But because of this white stork's robustness, the size and the journeys that they take, they have been used to learn about migration. So they started with ringing them and using the rings to identify which birds go where. And then they started using telemetry and satellite tagging as well. So very early on, these were quite large packs that were being fitted to these birds. And we are actually still GPS satellite tagging them today. And we've learned an awful lot, not just about the stork's migration, but also other birds and the threats that they face along the way. So white storks actually have two very distinct migratory routes. The most direct route is across through the Mediterranean and across the Mediterranean Sea. However, these storks, although they've got a 2-metre wingspan, are not particularly strong flyers, and they use thermal updrafts to cross large distances with very little energy used. And this has meant that they go in two very distinct routes, the eastern and the western route. So the east is across the Bosphorus, so along the Levant and up the Nile Valley, whereas the western route is through the Iberian Peninsula and across the Strait of Gibraltar and into Morocco. And they can end up in so northern Africa, but most likely southern Africa and western Africa as well. Research has shown that a number of different migratory strategies are used, and also that behaviours are changing. So although we know that they prefer to cross over land routes or very short water crossings, different strategies are used in different weather conditions, and the storks actually make a trade-off between flying and soaring. But it's also shown that juveniles are less experienced and they're more likely to get blown off course, and this will change where they end up, whereas adults are more likely to be able to get themselves back on the right route and end up in the same location for winter. Only 30% of juvenile white storks will survive their first migration. So this video here is taken from some research carried out by Dr. Andrea Flack at the Max Planck Institute for Ornithology. They tagged 27 white storks with high resolution GPS and 3D acceleration data tags. And this was used to show how social dynamics within the flock actually affect their migration. So this video here is color coded. The birds with the blue trails are experienced birds, or those with a higher aptitude for using these thermal updrafts to their best and making sure that they're using very little energy. So they're not having to flap at all or very little. The red, it goes down through to red, and these are younger birds, inexperienced birds, or birds that just aren't as able to read the thermal updrafts to use them correctly. But what these ones are doing is they're following the leaders, they're following the blue-trailed birds so that they can make the most of their discovery. However, to keep up with those leaders, they have to leave the thermals lower down and flap harder to get to the next thermal. And this uses quite a lot of energy. And the GPS data is actually shown, and these two different strategies between the leaders and the followers has shown that it affects where they overwinter. Leaders tend to go further south and winter in southern or western Africa, whereas the followers, the red-trailed birds, are less likely to travel as far. They stay in southern Europe and Spain, and some are not actually going very far from their breeding grounds. We're seeing a difference in strategies with our released birds as well, and this is something we're going to be looking at in a lot more detail during the 5 years of releasing these juvenile birds. So how does our reintroduction actually work? It's 3-phased, and we're using the methodology which was created by the Swedish project. So the first phase is to create a static population. So this is some drone footage of the enclosure at Net. It's 6 acres, so it's quite a nice large area, and you can see we've got a netted enclosure just inside. So to create a static population, we wanted flightless birds. Now these birds are rescued from Poland. They were injured in the wild, and due to their injuries could not be released back into the wild because they would not regain their flight. So these were rescued in Poland, rehabilitated at Warsaw Zoo before coming to Net in 2016. So this was also done at our satellite sites during 2017 and 18. And they're in an enclosure mainly to keep them safe from predation. These birds can't get off the ground, so would be susceptible to being predated by foxes and other ground predators. But these act like a magnet for any birds that might be flying over. And within 3 months of having them here at Net, we had 2 wild birds fly over the enclosure. They will also form a static breeding population as well once they reach sexual maturity. The second phase is to create a free-flying but hefted population. So these birds, again, are birds from Poland. And these are birds that were injured in the wild but rehabilitated and can regain their flight. They've come to us. We hold them at our release sites for 2 winters. That's what that netted aviary was for inside the enclosure. So they stay with us for 2 winters. Now this causes them to imprint on that individual site. So once they're released, they will go exploring, but they will return to that site, or they'll stay within a certain distance of that site. And these are birds that are, again, attracting any that might be passing over, but also are our resident breeding population. And the chicks and the pairs that we had from this year are from this group of birds. And again, we've done that here at Knepp and at Wadhurst. The third phase is to introduce first year juveniles. So one of the things that was found with the Swedish project was that a lot of the birds using the first and the second phase, so we've got our static birds, but also our free-flying birds, none of them were migrating, or very few of them were actually migrating, because they were so imprinted on the site and the fact that they've got those other birds keeping them there as an anchor almost. So what they trialled was actually releasing first year bred birds. So these are birds bred in captivity, and as soon as they are fledged, released into the wild. And because these birds aren't actually imprinted on a site, they have that urge to migrate. And it's those birds that facilitate that migratory population. So with us, they are chicks reared at Cotswold Wildlife Park, and then we released them here at Knepp. And then we did our first year last year. So our post-release monitoring, we're doing quite a lot of monitoring to make sure that what we're doing is working. We want to make sure that we're forming robust science to inform and enhance the success of the reintroduction. And we're using multiple methods for doing this. And I'm going to give a quick overview of them, but talk in a bit more detail about each of them when we look at some of the results that we've had over the last couple of years. So we've partnered, so ringing, we've, all of our birds are ringed. So they're all ringed with these Darvik rings. They're our project rings, so they're bright blue, and they all start with the letters GB, and then they have a letter or a number combination following that. So all of our birds, whether they are free-flying or resident static birds, are wearing these project rings. They also are, all the free-flying birds are also wearing these silver BTO rings. So these are rings from British Trust for Ornithology, and this helps if any of them are caught up at any point, they can be identified, and all of the sightings go back to the BTO that we record throughout the project. We can get a lot of data from ring sightings that come in from the general public. It helps engage with the public, but also helps give us a really clear idea of what some of these birds are doing once they've been released. So we've partnered with the University of East Anglia for the GPS tagging. So we're working with Dr. Aldina Franco, who's been working on a project in Portugal for a number of years now. They've been monitoring and researching what the differences in the migration behaviours of these birds in Portugal, in particular the ones that are living on these landfill sites. So we're partnered with the UEA, but also MoveTech and the BTO as well. And we GPS tag the birds so that we can collect data that would otherwise be difficult to get. So the ringing is fantastic, but you get a lot of gaps because you only get, 1 or 2 really good sightings of these birds, and you're not quite sure what they've done in between. And obviously, as our juveniles are migrating, we want to make sure that we can see where they're going. So the GPS data is actually really detailed. We can find out where they're going, so we can look at their migration behaviour, we can see what routes they're taking. We can also have a look at fine scale habitat use. So like I say, the data is incredibly detailed. I can see whether the bird was flying, how high it was flying, and at what speed it was flying, and where it was going. I can see whether it's roosting. I can see whether they are foraging. And with the data from the locations and also the behaviour that is shown through those tags, we can find out what areas these birds are using. But it also gives us an idea of their survival as well. So we can see how many of these birds are surviving, and if we lose any for any particular reason, we can try and find out why and what happened. So we've actually put 16 tags on in the last 2 years. These are on our juveniles. So we did 8 in 2019 and 8 this year. And we've got more planned for next year, hopefully with a higher proportion of birds tagged as well. We've also been using camera trapping, and this is actually led by my volunteers. And one of the things we're using with the cameras is we've got them set up at our release sites. And we want to see from these cameras how many of these birds are returning, if they're returning to the sites for food or what they're doing. We can have a look at their behaviour. We can actually find out quite a lot. And some of the cameras have actually been built by my volunteers. So we've been using My Nature Watch cameras, which are small DIY cameras, which you can buy all the components and build yourself. So I've been working with the Royal College of Art with that. That's their project. And that has really been useful to find out which birds are coming back. We've seen some really interesting behaviour this year in particular. We've had 2 or 3 of our juveniles moving that we released this year, moving between our release sites, moving adult birds with them. And it's because of the trail cameras and the sightings that have come in from that that we know which birds have gone where, which is really fantastic. Okay, quick pause for some questions if anybody has any. Sophie, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Just bear with me 1 second. Just trying to turn my video on. The technology challenges. We do have a couple of questions while I work out how to turn my video on. The first one is from Helen Hawkins. Are you currently taking volunteers, or has COVID put a stop to that?
So I am still collecting volunteers. I currently have a waiting list. So you can contact me and through the website, White Stork product website, which is on my last slide. Contact me, let me know that you're interested in volunteering, and I'll add you to the waiting list for the next time we do a training day.
Fantastic. I think you may have quite a few volunteers from today's session, Lucy. It's absolutely fascinating. Wonderful. Another couple of questions coming in. Do they have predators?
So yeah, they have predators across their range. So yeah, here in the UK, it's mainly things like foxes if they get caught unawares on the ground, which can happen. It takes a few seconds for them to get off the ground. They're quite not quite as graceful on the ground as they are in the air. But across their range, also things like eagles and things will take them as well. And in particular, the nestlings. I saw a video from this year of a goshawk actually taking a chick out of a nest. So yeah, they do have some predators.
Wow, fascinating. Thank you. Next question is, are they related in any way to the heron?
So they're not actually part of the same family as the heron. There's 22 different species of stork. They're kind of off of the same branch, but not directly related.
Wow, brilliant. Right, couple more questions coming in. What is the molting strategy, timing, etc.?
So with the storks, it's actually quite random. They don't molt sequentially, so they don't molt in a certain order. And that's why sometimes you can see them flying around, they've got random feathers missing. They don't tend to molt quite as neatly as other bird species I've seen. But they do tend to molt, the females in particular will molt after they've had chicks and stuff. They get really dirty sitting on those nests, especially if they regurgitate food into the nest and then sit on top of it. So the females always look pretty dirty by the end of the season. So they'll molt prior to migration if they can. Yeah.
Brilliant. And I think the last question for the moment. Oh no, we've got more coming in. This is brilliant. How does their size compare with the heron?
So they are slightly larger than a heron. They stand a little bit taller than a heron, and a wider wingspan. So yeah, generally a little bit bulkier than a heron.
Fantastic. Some great questions coming in. And we have a question. Is it true that black storks need to be taught migration? And if so, why are white storks different? Reintroduced fledglings able to work out migration for themselves?
I'm not 100% sure about black storks, if I'm completely honest. I know with our white storks, it's just completely innate. They've got that drive to fly south for the winter. What we've seen with ours in particular is, they are the only ones crossing from the UK. There are no other, it's a real historical migration route, which they've got to relearn for themselves. So it's a lot to do with weather conditions and where they cross. That it changes. It's been different last year to this year, but they'll actually they'll find wild storks as they migrate south, and they'll learn those routes, and they'll get experience each year that they do it as well. But that instinct to fly south is completely built in within them. Hopefully that answers the question.
Wow, that's fascinating. Brilliant. Oh, and we have another one coming in. Quite a few actually. Sorry, Lucy, you're going to be inundated with this is brilliant. Thank you everyone for your engagement. This is really exciting. Let me see where I am. Saw one in Beddington, Surrey. I'm told that it travelled around England a bit prior to arriving here. Has that one managed to migrate?
So our individual at Beddington is still at Beddington. He seems to have decided he wants to stay there. So he's one of our hefted birds. He had spent a little bit of time flying around the country and is still at Beddington. So the majority of those adults that we've got here in the UK are likely to stay and not to migrate, because we have quite mild winters. There's plenty of food around for them. So yeah, he'll probably stay now. A bit late now to be migrating.
Wonderful. Has there been any instances of disturbance, animal, human, or at the release site?
So it was really busy at NEP this year. Obviously, all the news went out at the same time as lockdown lifted. It was kind of a perfect storm, and it was really busy at NEP. Luckily, our pair, storks are pretty used to being around people, so they weren't too bothered, but we were able to manage people enough with the use of volunteers to sort of give the storks space. But we haven't had too much disturbance at all from people, actually. It's been really good. Most people are just pleased to be able to see them, and are pretty good at keeping their distance.
Wonderful. I think everywhere's been very busy this year, isn't it? As a result of lockdown. We've all noticed that. Our reliance on nature, which is great for people to realise that. It's wonderful. Right, a few more questions. When juveniles migrate back to the UK, do they return to their home nest or build their own nearby? At what age do they start breeding? That's an excellent question.
So they should return to the area that they nested, where they hatched. We haven't had any return yet because they won't be returning until they are about 3 or 4 years old. So everything crossed that in the next couple of years we'll have some starting to return to NEP. They should build their own nest. They won't use the nest that their parents use, but they'll try and find somewhere within the same kind of area to nest. and they don't typically breed until they're sort of 4-5 years old, and don't become really good breeders until they're sort of 7-8 years old. So the first couple of attempts might be a bit haphazard, but yeah.
Brilliant. Right, we understand that it is regarded as good luck in parts of Europe to have storks nesting on house roofs. There is a strategy for dealing this. Is there a strategy for dealing with this concept in England?
Yeah, we're putting together a strategy at the moment as we've had more storks nesting in and around the net. We've had a lot of people contact us asking about what they can do to help. Can they put platforms on their roofs? So this winter, during our quiet period, it's my job to put together a document to help advise people if they should want to do that. But we'll also be putting stuff into place in case there are any conflicts and any nests need to be removed or storks need to be sort of shifted off of a certain nest site on someone's roof if they aren't happy with it, or they nest on a chimney which gets used over certain periods of time and things like that. So we'll be making sure that everything's in place to assist people either way.
Brilliant. There's a couple more questions that have come in, more about obviously loving your presentation, and wondering if we can look at the downloadable document or the presentation or the slides at a later point, and possibility of publishing this lecture on our website. Obviously, we are recording this, and it is, for me, it's been absolutely fascinating so far, and I'm sure many more of our members would absolutely love to see it.
Fantastic.
So we can continue that conversation offline.
Yeah.
I don't have any more questions with regards to white storks at the moment. So Lucy, if you'd like to
I will do.
Move on, and feel free to ask questions throughout her presentation, and we'll address them at the end. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Right. So now I just want to cover some of the milestones from 2019. It was quite an exciting year. Everything started to happen after a couple of years of being quite quiet, just setting up the project. So one of the key things that happened sort of late 2017-18 and into 19 was one of our birds making an unexpected journey. So one of the things, or one of the questions a lot of people had quite early on in the project, or one of the concerns, was that because these guys like to cross very narrow crossings, they don't like to cross water very much because of the way that they travel, was whether actually they would cross the English Channel at all. And so looking at the distances, so the crossing across the Bosphorus is negligible, it's tiny. The crossing across the Strait of Gibraltar is 14 kilometres, whereas the crossing at the shortest point from the UK across to France, across the English Channel, is actually 33 kilometres. So quite a lot of people were questioning whether this would actually be undertaken by the storks. And we had one individual in particular. So this is one of our birds. She is from really early on in the project. She was actually from one of the cohorts in 2016 who we were told would never regain their flight. She hopped the fence quite early on, bless her. She's defied everybody and regained her flight perfectly well. And she has made some really interesting journeys. And this has all been done using the ring number. So during July in 2017, she flew up to Norfolk and Norwich. During August of the same year, she was spotted down in Dorset. Later on in August, just a week or so later, she was seen in Kent, and she was actually joined by an unidentified stork, a stork without any ring numbers on. And she spent some time down in Dungeness. In September, she was seen flying through Rustington and then seen at Pagham Harbour. and she spent a couple of days on the Isle of Wight. She was then spotted in Brittany. So this was our first bird from the project who was spotted in Europe and in France. So she crossed the channel. So we don't know where she crossed from. We think it's likely that she crossed from the Isle of Wight, as that was the last place that she was seen. She left her friend on the Isle of Wight and continued without her partner. But we don't know what she did from there. It's possible that she carried on further south, but we didn't have any other sightings. And we didn't have any sightings of her through 2018, and became a little bit concerned that something may have happened to her on her journey. But actually, in April of 2019, she was spotted in Somerset. So not only had she crossed south, but she'd crossed back north to the UK. A couple of days after being seen in Somerset, I spotted her here at Knepp in the enclosure with our other storks. She spent a few days up in Berkshire before returning to Knepp again. And actually, she is one of our females that had chicks this year. So she's actually stayed now in the UK since she returned last year. She was seen doing quite a lot of displaying last year, but she didn't do anything else. But like I say, this year, she actually had a nest and had chicks as well. We had our first nest last year as well, which was really exciting. So this was our first nest, and they completely caught us by surprise. We weren't really expecting any of them to be breeding quite this early. Most of the ones that came in 2016 were juveniles, so we wouldn't expect them to be breeding until kind of this year or next year at the earliest. But last year, this female, GB07, built this nest, and she actually paired up with a male who isn't wearing any rings. And although we can't say for certain that he is from Europe, it is more than likely that he is one of the wild vagrants that we get here in the UK. And they are a pair that actually nested again this year. So she had 3 eggs, but unfortunately they failed to hatch, and we think that was due to her age last year, just on the cusp of being at breeding age. We also had our first juvenile release and last year, and we released 24 juveniles, which had been bred at Cotswold Wildlife Park, and they came to Knepp in July and spent just a couple of weeks with us in our large netted aviary before being released. 8 of those were GPS tagged, and we had some really, really interesting data come back from that. And the biggest success, which we know of because of those GPS tags, was our first British bred juvenile white stork to migrate. So this is Marge. She was nicknamed Marge by the Durrell team at the Bath office after the stork Margarine. And after just 2 days after being released, she crossed the channel from Dover to Calais, right at the point that we wanted them to cross. So that was on the 15th of August. And because of her Polish bloodline, it was a real interesting moment to see which way she headed. Would she go east and go down the Eastern Flyway, which her parents would have done, or go along the Western route? And she started going east until she hit Luxembourg. And what we think happened here is that she met wild white storks and her direction changed. She continued south and west along the Western Flyway. She continued going, she went around the Pyrenees, around the coast, which is quite an unusual spot to go around. Normally they go over further west. She carried on all the way down and reached just south of Madrid on the 27th of August. Now, she stayed in this place for 3 weeks. And this is where she was. She was at a landfill site. She was doing what storks do best. And this site south of Madrid is known for its white storks. At that time of the year, during the migration, there can be over 1,500 storks on this site. So she spent 3 weeks here, feeding herself up, recovering from her very long journey down, and she left here on the 17th of September. She carried on heading south, and on the 23rd of September, she became our first stork to cross the Strait of Gibraltar and to make it into Morocco. And we know from our work with the University of East Anglia that she actually crossed the channel with one of their Portuguese tagged storks in a flock. So she met up with one of those. She spent the winter on multiple landfill sites in Morocco. She actually headed back north early spring and spent the summer in southern Spain, and she is now back in Morocco again at the moment. So our key milestones from this year kind of blew last year out of the water. Really exciting year for the project. We had 3 nests here at NEP, and we had chicks as well. So we had our nest from last year. So like I say, normally they will return to the same nest every year, build on it and try again. But our pair from last year decided they were going to move. They went to a different tree, which apparently is not completely unusual. If they have failed for any reason, they will try a different site. So not unusual that these guys decided they didn't want to use that nest this year, but to try a new one. So that was this lovely nest that they made, not particularly far from where they nested last year. And the really interesting thing from most of these nest sites is actually they can see the stork enclosure from the tops of those trees. So they can see the other storks, and that's their feeling of being in a colony. We also had a second nest. So this is our bird who went down to Brittany, so Z9404. And she paired up with one of our males from the project as well. And then we had a third nest. Now, this nest is actually one of my favourites. It's a beautiful nest. It's kind of your quintessential stork nest. They were a young pair. They're a pair of our birds. They only just reached sexual maturity, so just under 4. They did everything they should. They built the nest amazingly. They built it within about a week. They didn't lay any eggs, though. They were seen mating, and they are still quite regularly seen on top of that nest even now. So we're hoping that bodes well for next year. But out of the 2 active nests that we had, so nest 1 and nest 2, we had 9 eggs. 6 of those eggs hatched, so we had 3 in each nest that hatched, and we had 4 chicks make it to fledging. So that was 3 from nest 1 and 1 from nest 2. And here is a little bit of footage of our nest 1 with the 3 chicks. You can see just inside the nest. So the parents did amazingly well. Now this tree is over a footpath, so they built their nest over a footpath, which on one hand is great, but it also meant that we had to divert the footpath once things started to get quite busy with visitors. But it meant that people could see this nest, they could see the storks, they could see the chicks, and they could watch the behaviour. And you see here both of the parents feeding some of the slightly smaller chicks. So yeah, 3 chicks hatched, 3 chicks fledged, which was absolutely amazing from this nest. So this is our pair who attempted to nest last year. Done really well. It just gives you a bit of perspective. Beautiful oak trees here at NEP, and we think that here in the UK that is what they would have used to nest in. So with these chicks, we had the grand task of trying to get up into those nests to ring these chicks so that we can monitor them going forward. Luckily, we got in touch with, or someone got in touch with us, who is an amazing tree climber. He's a tree surgeon from Surrey, actually. Jeremy, and he's also a bird ringer, and he helped us get up into these nests. This is one of his photos from up in the second nest. So we got these chicks down. So Jeremy went up the first nest in a cherry picker because it was really difficult to get up. I mean, we're talking 20 plus meters above ground. He got up, we lowered the chicks down. They were all weighed, we took measurements, and they were all given project rings and BTO rings as well. And these guys did really, really well. So over July, early week of July, we had lots of this going on, lots of wing flapping, lots of practicing. This guy was actually standing on top of one of his siblings doing this. But we also had our first chick fledge on the 9th of July after lots and lots of wing stretching. Here he goes. Now, I've got an amazing video to show you next, and hopefully the sound is going to work. It is amazing. We had hundreds of people coming every day to come and see these birds, and we were getting quite a lot of regulars as well who would keep coming back and a couple of volunteers who basically camped out down there every day. So just listen to this.
Oh, so sweet. Oh, awesome. Oh, God, I'm glad you said that.
So that was our first chick to fledge, and yeah, a fantastic moment for the Stork project. And you can just hear the reaction from the crowd and from the volunteers who were just absolutely ecstatic to see our first wild hatched white stork chick in 600 years, which is amazing. So next up this year, we had our release. So we released 19 juveniles this year, which were bred at Cotswold Wildlife Park. And 8 of these were GPS tagged. Now, we had a fantastic day for it this year. We had perfect weather. The adults were up in the thermals over the release pen, and it just encouraged these juveniles to come out. And they were absolutely amazing. You could tell that they were juveniles, and this was their first full flight into the open air. They were a little bit wobbly, but at one point we had 38 white storks circling above us, which was just absolutely amazing. And like I say, we tagged 8 of these birds, and we've been able to look at their journeys since. So a group of them, I'll give you some details of some of the journeys that they've made this year. And on the 30th of August, a group of 25 storks left Knepp and they headed west. Now, a lot of them headed west last year as well, and multiple birds tried to cross from Cornwall, which is obviously not ideal and not what we would like. We were really looking at what was going to happen. So as soon as we've released the birds, I become slightly obsessed with checking GPS data every day to see where they are and what they're doing. And these guys headed west, and they stayed in Cornwall for a couple of days. We had loads of fantastic sightings of them coming in. But then on the 3rd of September, they started heading back east. So as you can imagine, we all got quite excited. They spent the evening here, which is near Yeovil, and then on the 5th, they continued east along the coast, so just south of Knepp here, and they continued east, which is absolutely amazing. So by this point, I think it was a flock of perhaps 20 birds, and by 3:30 on the 5th of September, 6 of our tagged birds were tracked crossing the channel, which was amazing. So they flew all the way back from Cornwall and crossed where we want them to cross, which was absolutely amazing. And by the end of September, we had 3 of those tagged birds in France, and we had 3 in Spain. On the 12th of October, two of them actually crossed the Strait of Gibraltar, but they crossed at the same time, but on the 11th, one of them attempted to cross. And I've spoken to a group who look at the crossings at the Strait of Gibraltar. They monitor the number of birds going across the crossing. And apparently on the 11th of October, the weather conditions weren't great. And a group of storks attempted to cross, but decided to head back, which is what our tagged bird did. So it was part of that flock, which is fantastic. But yeah, on the 12th, weather conditions still not amazing, but a small group did cross. And these two became our second and third stork to cross into Morocco. And actually one of them is now on the same site as Marge is. So that's just absolutely fantastic that our two different generations of storks are actually meeting up in Morocco. So just a quick overview and an update of the locations of some of those birds. We do know that from the 8 tagged this year that we have lost 2 of those tagged birds. One unfortunately stopped on the 4th of September. We've recovered the tag, and unfortunately this individual is known to have hit power lines. Now, power lines across Europe are a huge issue for our storks, and one of the things that we're looking to do is to work with the electricity companies here in the UK to try and make sure that this isn't something that happens often. So we'll be doing everything we can to work with the electricity companies for this. We also know that another one stopped just before a group crossed the Pyrenees. Now, we actually haven't been able to recover this tag. Last year, we had one tag recovered from Spain. We managed to connect with people, colleagues in Spain, to be able to recover that tag. We haven't been able to do that with this one, unfortunately. So we're not sure whether it's just a fault with the tag and the group carried on, or whether something has happened. It's possible that this bird was actually predated. So we know that these are the locations of some of our tagged birds. So we have one tagged bird still here in the UK, and she's one of the individuals that's been moving between Knepp and Wadhurst and moving adult storks around with her. So we now have some of Wadhurst storks at Knepp and some of Knepp storks at Wadhurst. We also know that she's got 2 other of the untagged but ringed juveniles from this year with her as well. We've had one sighting come in of one of our juveniles from this year who is ringed but not tagged, and he has been seen on a landfill site with other wild white storks, which is fantastic. So we've got one individual from last year's release still here in the UK. He didn't migrate and he stayed with us over the winter. And again, he's moved over to Wadhurst at the moment. We've got one who was last seen in Germany. We've got one who is in the northern part of Spain, again from last year's release. We've got 2 who are on a landfill site just south of Madrid, which is where one of our tagged juveniles is from this year. So we've been in contact with some bird watchers in the area who have managed to get a sighting of GB7E, and we're hoping that they will be able to locate the other 2 birds that we've got there as well. There's one of them. And of course, we've got Marge, who's down in Morocco. So you can see our juvenile storks from last year and this year are kind of spread across Europe and even down into Morocco at the moment. And we're hoping that next year or the year after, some of those juveniles from 2019 will start to make their way back. So out of our chicks, we've actually had very few sightings of these birds since they left Knepp, and they left Knepp at the same time as the group of 20 flew down to Cornwall. But we have had one sighting of the first chick who hatched and the first chick who fledged, and he was seen down in Devon, and he was seen down there on the 30th of August. So yeah, flew down with the group that went to Cornwall. He was seen back at NEP on the 6th of September and is now currently at Wadhurst with some of the birds there. Now, although we can't say for certain what's happened to our other 3 chicks, it is possible and likely that they crossed the channel with our other juveniles. We are contacting quite a lot of birders across France and Spain to try and get as many sightings as we possibly can, and hopefully we'll be able to get a sighting of these guys. We're hoping that perhaps in the next couple of years we may actually be able to tag some of these wild hatched birds, which will give us a real insight into their behaviours. Okay, I've got another little stop here, a pause for myself and also to ask for questions. So I'll stop sharing my screen again. And if you have any questions, please ask.
Thank you very much, Lucy. We do have more questions coming in. Right, the first question is, what is the typical survival rate to fledgling and what is the typical hatching rate?
So it varies a lot, and actually the data that we've got here for the UK is limited because obviously we don't know. We've been using data from the Portuguese study, and it varies a lot depending on where the sites actually are. And off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact fledging and hatching rates. But what we've had here at NEP this year, with the 9 eggs, 6 hatching and 4 fledging, that is about right for especially for the age of the birds anyway.
Fantastic. Right, do you have any idea what gives the storks the idea that they cannot fly from Cornwall, for example, but when they come back to Kent, then fly to the Channel? Is their eyesight good, or do they rely on storks with experience to guide them? That's an excellent question.
That's a really good question. So normally across the rest of their sort of range and the crossings, they would be relying on other storks who have got the experience to do it. But obviously here in the UK, like I said earlier, we've got no white storks that have done this migration before. And so they're all new to it. They do have quite good eyesight. So we think that they would, especially from the shorter crossing, that they would actually be able to see France from where they are. I mean, we're talking they're flying hundreds of feet up and able to see quite long distances from that advantage. So we think they'll be able to see, but it also depends an awful lot on the weather conditions and which way the wind's blowing. You know, if they're following thermals and the wind's blowing in a westerly direction, they may end up heading west, which is what happened last year. And although they did cross, some of them did cross from that point in Cornwall, some of them made it to France, which is good, but obviously ideally they want to be crossing on that on the eastern route. And one of the things that we're actually going to be looking into further is evaluating the environment data, which goes along with the GPS tagging data, so we can see what causes this westerly or easterly flight pattern.
Wonderful.
Lots more to learn.
Goodness me, there's so much to learn. I've learned so much today. It's just absolutely fascinating. Right, next couple of questions. Why do they seem to favour landfill sites?
It is purely because of the abundance of food and the fact that you have other storks at those sites. So some of those sites will have storks living on all year round, so not migrating. So some of our storks who are now in sort of central Spain probably won't migrate any further now. That is where they'll stay, and that's because the birds on those sites are also staying in those areas. There is a lot of organic matter on European landfill sites, which makes it a quick and easy source of food, and they are very adaptable. They're like gulls. You get a lot of gulls at these landfill sites as well. One thing that is going to be changing over the next few years, though, is the amount of food that is allowed to be put on these landfill sites. So the EU laws are changing. So at some point in the future, there will not be organic matter at these landfill sites. And there's going to be lots of studies. I know Aldina from UEA is going to be looking at how that changes the behaviours of the storks. Will they return to their old migration patterns? Will they start migrating again rather than staying on those landfill sites? will they find other areas to find food themselves, and will it have an impact on the population numbers? So again, so much to learn. Yeah.
Wow, I look forward to maybe another talk from you in a couple of years' time then,
Yeah.
if not sooner. Okay, last question I've got for the moment. So if anyone else would like to ask some questions, do feel free. I can see one more coming in now. Is there any risk of dangerous levels of plastic and toxin consumption at the landfill sites?
Yeah, there is, unfortunately, as there is everywhere these days. But it is another project which has been happening over the last couple of years. There's a PhD student who's been monitoring the amount of plastic that these storks have been eating at the landfill sites. Her research is due to be published next year, I think. So there'll be lots of information coming out then. But they will be eating quite a lot of plastic, and unfortunately, storks do die from ingesting too much plastic at the landfill sites.
Oh, that's awful. Okay, last question I have for the moment is, when foraging for food, do they mainly use their sight, or do they rely on their sense of smell and hearing for this?
So I think with the storks, it's mainly their sight. So they're looking for movement more than anything else. I'm not sure how good their sense of smell is, or their hearing, to be honest. I know that they are mainly looking for movement. They will peck at anything that moves. So that, like I say, very opportunistic. If something runs out in front of them, and even if it's too big, they'll have a go. Yeah, so mainly sight, walking through the grasslands and things.
Fantastic. Right. Oh gosh, more questions coming in now. Is the group's preference to initially go to Cornwall based on prevailing winds?
I expect that was the case. But like I say, we're going to be looking at the environmental data for the exact times that they're travelling, so that we can actually analyse that and have a look whether that is having a real impact on which direction that they're moving. But it's likely that that's the way that the wind was blowing.
Great questions. Right, I have no more questions for the moment.
Cool.
As soon as I say that, one pops up. So let's just cover one more.
Yep.
Are they willing to have a go at anything? Did the stork that was trying a rabbit have any success? Now that's a fabulous question.
It is a fabulous question. I don't think it did, actually. So they don't have a very big gullet, so they do struggle to get some stuff down. I think herons are much better at getting bigger food down than the storks, but yeah, I didn't see that it actually managed it in the end. But one thing they will do is actually they'll pick and peck around carrion as well, because they'll be after all of the maggots and the beetles and the bugs that are in and around. So it could be that he just got a bit overzealous with it, really. But yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
Fantastic.
That is my last question from the audience. So thank you, everyone else. And back to you, Lucy.
Fantastic. I'll try and carry on before I lose my voice. Lots of talking. So the next thing that I want to talk about really is how we're using storks for nature connection. So I said at the beginning that this is one of the key reasons for using storks as a reintroduction, as well as their history and the ecology of having them here. But a real important part of the project, and one of the reasons for my role, is to help that connection and getting people engaged. So I do quite a lot with local communities, especially around the release sites. So last year I focused here around Knepp and was going to be doing the same this year, as well as expanding to around Surrey, but also around East Sussex as well. Obviously this year's been quite different. This is an amazing opportunity for me to speak to so many of you in what has been quite a challenging year. So last year I had nearly 500 people come on Stork Talk and Walk sessions. So these were held at Knepp. They were groups of 30 people, which seems like a lifetime ago now, being able to actually be outside with 30 people. Where I would give them a brief talk and overview of the project, and then we would walk out to the stork enclosure at Knepp and go and meet the storks, go and see them. There is something quite special about actually seeing them with your own eyes, and especially when they are flying. They are incredibly graceful, and it really does trigger something in people. There is something about them that is just magical. Obviously, I've been unable to run any of those sessions this year, but I've done a few online talks. I was lucky enough to speak at Bird Fair this year on their online talks, and also a couple of other talks online as well. It's really important for us that our local communities to the release sites are engaged, and that they feel like they have someone to come to if they've got any problems. So if they've got a stork trying to nest on top of their chimney, it's all very well having a crow or something shoving sticks down your chimney, but if you've got a stork making a nest, it may be a bit more of an issue for you. So it's good for people to have someone to come and talk to. And it's really important that these people in our local areas feel like the storks are theirs as well, and take ownership of the project and feel passionate about them as well. It really helps me to have local people involved. I mean, I've already mentioned my volunteers, and I'm going to again shortly. I've got some volunteers who live within walking distance of NEP, and they are such amazing ambassadors for the project, always talking about it, always excited about it, which is fantastic. And the more sightings I can get in from ring numbers, the bigger, better picture I can build of how these storks are doing. So yeah, it was amazing last year, actually getting out with people, coming to meet the storks. We had some fantastic responses and reviews. I've had people come to me since asking, about the nesting platform document. Can they put nest platforms up? They've got a stork in their area. What can they do to help? And all this is great, and it helps us then talk to more landowners and areas that we can then think, right, this is a great area for storks. How can we improve it for storks, and then therefore improve it for other species as well? The storks are a large charismatic species, and some people feel that the money that has been spent on storks might be better for conserving smaller species that need the help. One of the joys of using the storks is they're big, people can see them, people notice them, and it can help drive restoration for those other species, which is really, really important. Even last year, but more importantly this year, social media and online platforms have been incredibly useful and important for the project. And Twitter is one of our main areas. It's only me doing the social media, as well as everything else that I've already said that I do. So we currently only use Twitter because it's really time consuming to keep up with all these different social media platforms. So I do the website and Twitter at the moment. I'm looking to expand it, but I need a little bit more time in a day to be able to do all of this. But so we are at Project Stork on Twitter. We now have over 3,000 followers, and we only started the Twitter account in August last year when we did the release. So I'm blown away by the amount of followers and people who are interested in the project. It's been really important for connecting with members of the public, but also birders as well. And it gets the information of the project out there, but it also is really great for getting sightings coming in. Really helps to build a picture of what these birds are doing, where they're going, what they're eating. These photos on the left are from members of the public of one of our adults who has become quite famous. This is Doris. She was named by the community in Wiltshire where she spent the winter last year. She spent 3 months with them. She was in their local newspaper. She became really, really popular. And she has since travelled around the country. She's gone to Norfolk a few times. She's been down to the West Country. She's been to the Isle of Wight. And all of these sightings coming in have been amazing to learn what she's doing. But, she's eating a large earthworm here. We've had pictures of her eating fish and crickets and all sorts, and roosting on people's roofs and chimneys. And it's just been fantastic to get all of those sightings, but also hear about how excited people have been to see her and to learn about her story as well. And Twitter, I mean, it was a bit quieter this year, actually, believe it or not. But last year, Twitter was amazing after we released our juveniles. You know, the weekends that they flew down to Cornwall, we had almost minute by minute view of where these storks were and where they were going at any particular time. We had so many sightings coming in. It was, you know, the GPS data is great, but it's not live time. So it takes data throughout a day and then drops it all off at the end of the day or first thing the following day. So it's great, but it's got a bit of a delay on it. Whereas this, you know, people were tweeting as soon as they'd seen them. And that was absolutely amazing to see where they were and where they were going. But one of our others who flew down that way, one of the tagged juveniles from last year, she spent some time at a site down in Hampshire. And we were getting absolutely amazing sightings, again, with what she was eating, what she was doing, lots of lovely videos, and again, lots of fantastic feedback from the community who were going out especially to see her, which was fantastic. So I've already mentioned birders slightly, but connecting with people who are out looking for birds, and I've got the experience of reading ring numbers and things like that is amazing. We've had 684, not including anything that's come in over the last couple of days, but these are the number of sightings we've had come in over the last year and a half. Of sightings. So this is the pure number of citizen science reports that we've had come in from people. They're coming in from people who have never seen a stork before, people who have seen storks before, or, like I say, birders who are out looking for ring numbers, ecologists, site managers. They're coming in from all over the place, which is absolutely amazing. We've had sightings come from all areas of the country, so right down from the tip of Cornwall all the way to Dover, and even up in Yorkshire, where one of our storks spent some time this year. I'm working really hard on increasing the number of these sightings that we're getting from across France and Spain. Once our birds have left the UK shores, it's really important that we try and get as many of these sightings as possible, and they have increased, which is absolutely amazing. There are birders who go and sit at these landfill sites and look for storks with rings on. And the pictures again here on the left are from birders who have come, you know, they've gone to those sites and they've seen thousands of storks and managed to pick one of our birds out of the crowd and have sent in the data, which is absolutely awesome. I had one this year who has been absolutely amazing. He actually travelled part of France specifically to go and find some of our birds for us, which is just absolutely amazing that people want to get so involved. But yeah, and again, like I say, we've been dealing with groups across these areas as well, and this group here have they do lots of studies in the autumn looking at the number of birds crossing the channel. And the moment that Marge returned to Morocco this year after spending the summer in Spain, she crossed on the same day as 1,169 other white storks. She was part of that flock, and that additional data is really important for learning about how these birds are behaving and how they're integrating with wild populations. And to know that at least one of our birds was part of that flock is mind-blowing for me. This year, like I said already, has been quite an unusual year, but as quite a lot of people had extra time once the lockdown was lifted, and the stork news, the news of the chicks went out, NEP became incredibly busy, and we took the opportunity to actually use that to help engage with the people that were coming to see NEP. We opened up a trailer which allowed our volunteers to safely speak to members of the public whilst we were, you know, maintaining the 2 meters different distance and making sure that both our volunteers were safe, but also the general public as well. And whilst they were there, they conducted a few surveys, asked a few people questionnaires, and you know, tried to find out as much information about these people that were coming as possible. So between the 23rd of June and the 18th of July, there were over 4,855 visitors to the trailer. We know that not everybody who came through the field or past the nest came to the trailer to talk to the volunteers, and we think going by the parking and how many people were around, we had over 30,000 visitors just during that time whilst the chicks were in the nest and leading up to fledging. This equates to over 40 days worth of volunteer hours with the amount of time that these volunteers spent speaking to the public. They were down there all the time, and actually it wasn't manned 24/7 either. So, you know, it's amazing to see how many people we engaged with during that time. So one of the things the volunteers were asking people were whether they were new to NEP or they'd been before. So yeah, 775 of them were regular visitors to NEP and have come quite often. 1,238 were first timers. They'd never been to NEP before and had heard about the storks on Springwatch and through the SIBC, which was Chris Packham's Self-Isolating Bird Club, where I announced the stork chick news. So lots of people were coming. 123 of them had no idea about the project at all, and 639 of them came just to see the storks, which was absolutely amazing, and just shows the power that these birds have on connecting people with nature, getting them outside. We weren't talking to them just about the storks, we were talking to them about rewilding and about the ecosystems and about the other species that we have at NEP. They came from all over the place, from local villages and towns, from London, Shetland, Manchester, Bournemouth, Cornwall, the Isle of Wight, Salisbury, Devon, Basingstoke. They were coming from all over the place to come and see these birds, which was just amazing. We've also had some really unexpected outcomes and engagement as well. We've had blog posts written, we've had poems written about the storks. There was a piece of music that was written recently with the storks as the inspiration. This picture here is from a chap who had seen our stork down at Sunnyside, which is the one down in Hampshire. This was the GB8E, one of our juveniles who spent some time in the area. He wrote a blog post about her and about the project, which is amazing. I had families emailing me during lockdown saying, we've been using the storks as a subject for homeschooling, and look what my children have designed to sell in the shop. And, you know, they were using the storks to inspire them to learn about everything, basically, from maths and science to, you know, just general nature knowledge, which was really, really interesting to see. I've had 2 or 3 people contact me now saying that they're writing a children's book about the storks and can we help, and you know, it's going to be illustrated and would we like to use it as part of the project. And it's just been mind-blowing, the impact that the storks have had on so many people, and what a sign of hope they were during a really, really difficult time for everyone around the world, not just here in the UK. And to think that the storks were bringing a little bit of life and hope during that time is just amazing. We had umpteen bits of artwork sent in. We had this beautiful one sent in. And there's also a mural that was painted in Brighton. So this is on one of the streets in Brighton, using our storks as, you know, part of the Extinction Rebellion campaign, letting nature breathe. And yeah, just to think our storks are on someone's wall in the middle of Brighton, and I still haven't had a chance to go and find it yet, but hopefully I will do soon. But yeah, amazing to see the inspiration that these birds have brought to people. So my wonderful volunteers, like I say, I'm sure Surrey Wildlife Trust are exactly the same. Volunteers are such a wonderful part of my job. Absolutely love them. They've become a massive, big family. And it's a shame that we haven't been able to spend much time together this year, but we will work on that for next year, definitely. But they help me with all sorts. And I've got a group of 25 regulars who are passionate, dedicated, and they are totally in love with the storks. They can't do enough to help. And during lockdown, the volunteers weren't able to continue their usual volunteer activities. We decided that actually the day-to-day care of the storks and stuff had to be done by members of staff on site to reduce the number of people that were coming in and out, which was a real shame. But many of them came for walks and sat and watched the stork nest, and it was their little area of solace during really difficult times. But they're all back to their full activities. I have a waiting list, as I've already said. I think I've got about another 25 people on the waiting list, but I'm looking to expand the volunteer group, and even volunteers who can just go out looking for storks is fantastic. So my volunteers help with the feeding of the static birds here at Net. They help with maintenance on the enclosure. We build nests in the enclosure to help encourage our static birds to breed. Most of these have got ramps and stuff going up to them to enable our flightless birds to nest. This is Josh, one of my volunteers, testing out the stork nest, and the real need for cake and coffee, which is always needed if you want volunteers to undertake anything. But they also help with a lot of the sightings and the monitoring as well. So extra activities include engaging with the public at NEP. So whilst we were busy, they helped marshal the areas with the chicks and the nests so that the birds were kept safe, but also helping to talk to people about the project as well. As I said earlier, they're amazing ambassadors for the project. Because they're so passionate about it, it really comes across when they're talking, and hearing them speaking to other people and talking about what they do and the importance of the project and why we do it is a real joy for me, and just shows how much they love working with the project. So they've been helping with the nest monitoring. So, we know when chicks hatch, when chicks start exercising their wings, we know when they're starting to fledge, and we know all of this because of the work that the volunteers do. And they're out there at the moment, all hours, all days, all weathers, and keeping an eye on the nests. And actually in the last couple of days, they've let me know that some of the adults are starting to spend more time around the nest, which is really early for this year, but it shows that hopefully we'll have another good year. They help report sightings, so they help me to monitor which birds are coming and going. And only since June, so because we cancelled everything during March and April and May, June to October, they have done over 600 hours of volunteer time. And that's not including work, which is extra work by individuals. So that's, I think it's 80 days worth of work, not including the Stork trailer work as well. And I've got one volunteer in particular, Kevin. I couldn't do this without mentioning him. He's taken on the trail camera footage, and he thinks by the end of the year he will have done 8 weeks worth of 30-hour weeks working on the trail camera analysis, and we've learned so much from doing it as well. And yeah, I'm really grateful for all the extra work people put in. So we're going to be researching the nature connection, and we want to do this because it's part of the project's ambitions. We want to use the white stork to reignite affection and passion for the natural world. We want to use them as an emblem for environmental restoration. And through that, we're hoping that we can drive pro-conservation behaviour change. So by this I mean, people taking on tasks themselves, using less plastic in their own lives, changing the way that they live that's better for the planet, but also helping to conserve nature and do everything that they can to help our planet. And we're also going to be looking about how we can go about increasing nature connection. And what we're focusing on going forward is actually a Stork Schools programme. Now, this is in the planning stages, and we're also in the process of applying for various grants to get this working, as it will need another full-time member of staff, as I don't think I could take on a schools programme at the same time as everything else. But I will be helping to develop it. It's something that I'm really, really keen on getting sorted. So we want to work with primary school children. So we want to do in-class work, but also field trips to the Stork pens as well. We want to use the little My Nature Watch cameras that the children can build themselves, engage with the wildlife around them in and around their schools. We can talk about food webs, migration, travel. We can also, one of the real hopes is to connect with schools across Europe in areas where storks live, so that the schools can talk to each other, almost like a exchange program, but chatting about storks. And understanding the different cultures between here and where storks have lived for generations. We also want to work with secondary school children. Now, we know from research that this is an age where nature connection drops drastically. It's called the nature connection cliff. They basically go off the edge of a cliff, and their connection to nature completely drops. All children have connection to nature, but at this age, it tends to take a real plummet. And that can be because of a huge range of things. You know, it's caused by changes in their lifestyle, puberty, pressures at school, lack of time for doing anything, peer pressure, you know, a whole range of things. And what we want to do is we want to try and increase that nature connection during that age. We want to use technology to deal with this group. We want to have an online program for these guys, as they have very little time within school hours to be able to undertake any extra activities. So again, using the cameras, but we want to look more at the GPS tracking and talking about more environmental side of things. And we also want to set up a future conservationist placement programme. So A-level students, when they're looking at deciding what they want to do going forward, we want to help support them in a career with conservation. We want to provide them with opportunities for work placements, where they can work with us. They can learn from experts in the field. They can gather data, learn how to analyse it, how to use that data to inform decisions, and help them by getting extra things on their CV that would help them get into a university course and jobs post-university as well. So the current research we're doing a couple of things at the moment, and some of you may have seen this advertised. I know that the lady that we're doing this with has been reaching out to Facebook groups in and around the areas of the release sites. And we're doing a public perception study. This has been undertaken by developing a questionnaire which will gauge public views about the reintroduction. It will create a baseline of data and a survey that could also be used elsewhere, and it will track if and how perceptions change over time by using it as part of a long-term study. So it's collaborative research with the University of Brighton, and it's being led by Dr. Rachel White, who is an impartial university teacher. She has been awarded a Rising Star Initiative grant, which has given her money to be able to undertake this survey. Now we've had to change it, or she's had to change the way the study's been done this year. The original plan was for her to focus on communities around net and use a wide variety of methods to speak to people. She wanted to speak to people face to face, do things by mail, as well as doing some online studies as well. However, it all had to be done online during COVID, which has obviously led to slight bias in some of the data. But she's going to be analysing that going forward, and it'll be really interesting to see how the perception of storks change over time. One of the things that she did, she asked people to describe storks in 3 words, and these were some of the words that came up. it's raw data at the moment, so some of them are slightly random, like legs. Yeah, these are some of the words that came up, and it's just fantastic to see how many wonderful, positive words are being used with the storks in mind. One of the other studies that's being done is a population viability analysis. So we came into the project quite late, and we're obviously very keen to get as much scientific data about the storks and about the reintroduction as possible. And one of the ways to do this is by looking at the population viability analysis. So this is a way to understand how populations grow and how they decline, risk of extinction, and we can do various different forecasts for the future. So why we want to do it in particular is we want it to inform our strategies. So based on our current strategy of releasing juveniles over a 5-year period, we can input that data into the baseline data that we have for the storks we've currently got in the UK, and we can use it to predict what numbers of birds we can expect by 2030. So that will give us an idea of whether we will reach that, 30 to 50 breeding pairs by 2030. It's a way of modelling how the population is going to change over year. If it is below what we want for 2030 or what we're aiming for, it gives us the opportunity to look at that strategy and think about whether we want to be releasing higher numbers of juveniles, or if we want to extend the number of years we're going to be doing that. And we've got a student undertaking this study, and so she is from the UEA, so the University of East Anglia, and she's undertaking this study under the guidance of Dr. Aldina Franco, who had a PhD student do a similar study of the Portuguese storks who were using landfill sites. And they did a study on, which is due to be published next year. They studied how the impact of the removal of the organic matter on those landfill sites is going to possibly affect the population. So we're using the knowledge they learned from that with how we can model how the future population of UK storks will look. So kind of just summarising up now really what we've learned so far. And what we've learned is that the channel crossing is not necessarily a barrier. We know that the storks will migrate south. We've had one come back north very early on in the project, but it'll be really interesting to see what happens over the next 2 or 3 years when our juveniles that we started releasing last year should be starting to come back. We know that migration patterns for white storks are changing across the UK. They show huge variation in their behaviour. They're really adaptable, and that means that these migration patterns change with time and with variables as well. So it'll be interesting to see how the introduction of our British migration route will affect everything. We know that they're integrating with wild populations. We know that they're out there mixing with wild white storks, and we know that thanks to the sightings that we've been getting in from France and Spain. We know that most of them are migrating south, but that some are remaining, and that's not an issue, that's not a problem. It's great that we've got an expanding population here in the UK, but also great that they are moving south as well and behaving naturally. We know that the ones that are staying here in the UK are finding plenty of food. We know that from the sightings from the general public of all of the foraging availability that the storks have had, the ones that are staying here in the UK, and we have had a number of them overwintering in the UK for a couple of years now. Going forward, we know that next year we are likely to have more nests and more chicks, everything crossed for that. As we go forward, more of our released adults will be reaching sexual maturity, so the number of nests we have will be going up each year. we're taking bets on how many nests we'll have next year already. So yeah, we know that going forward, we're going to have more and more nests. We know that we're going to continue doing juvenile releases until 2023. So we've got another couple of years of that to go. And we're also going to be doing more of the GPS tracking of those birds and more of the post-release monitoring of all of the birds. Hopefully, going forward, we may also be able to tag some of those chicks in the nest as well. I'll be doing more public engagement and talks as we go forward, and also developing that schools programme, which will be really, really important. And the other thing that we really want to do and are doing is actually disseminating all of these data and everything that we're learning to not just the public, but also to peers and other conservationists in the country as well. So quickly, before I finish, how you can help. Now, I've mentioned it lots of times with the sightings, but reporting sightings is incredibly valuable to the project. So how you can get involved is by looking out for these rings. So all of our birds are wearing these blue rings on their upper left leg. As I said earlier, they're blue with the white writing, which starts with GB and then has either a number or a number and letter combination. You can report those sightings to us through the website where we have a sightings form, or through Twitter as well at Project Stork. It's really, really good if you have extra information as well. So the date, location, the ring number, and any photos and videos as well, and any other additional information that you'd like to share. So if you found it in a certain area or you saw it doing something in particular, please do let us know. Also, sightings of storks, even if you haven't managed to get the ring number, are equally as important, as normally I can join up the dots somewhere along the way with other sightings coming in. So please do send those in. So thank you very much for listening to me waffle on about storks for the last 2 hours. And if you have any questions or you'd like to say anything, then please feel free.
Thank you so much, Lucy. For this last section of questions, unfortunately, my internet is being a little bit temperamental, so I am going to pass over to my wonderful co-host, Emma Rothwell. Emma, if you could unmute yourself and turn your video on.
Yep.
Wonderful. So Emma will be taking the questions for you. One of the questions I just wanted to quickly address is, I see a gentleman called Barry had his hand raised. So Barry, if you would like to ask the question, do let me know. Because I can allow you to talk through this function, and it would be lovely to hear other people's voices as well, other than us three.
Yeah.
So Barry, if you'd like to just ask, I can allow you to talk now. Just wait to clarify.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Barry. Thank you very much. That's wonderful.
Well, it's been an absolutely wonderful talk. Thank you so much. I've learned an awful lot. I put a question actually in the text about whether you found any storks with lead shot, because I know it's a problem with migrating swans. I wonder whether there's been any experience of that for the UK or mainland Europe or Africa.
So we haven't, well, thank you very much for saying about the talk, Barry. It's lovely. It's lovely to hear someone else asking questions as well. It's a really good question. We haven't had any problems here in the UK as yet, but I know that especially on the eastern flyway it is a big problem with the lead shot and with white storks being shot down and hunted. But it's something that we'll obviously be keeping an eye on. Any storks that die here in the UK, we do actually send to ZSL, who do postmortems on them. So that will be something that will be on their list of things to look out for, definitely.
Thank you very much, Lucy.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Barry. Right, I am going to hand over to the lovely Emma to read out the questions. If anyone else would like to actually speak their questions, we'd love to hear your voice as well. So just raise your hand. Obviously not at the screen. Unfortunately, we can't see your faces. But at the bottom of your screen on the black toolbar, there should be a raised hand function, or you can use the chat facility. Just yell at us however you can. Over to you, Emma.
Okay, thank you, Sophie. Thanks, Lucy. That was absolutely amazing. So yeah, no, really good. So we've answered Barry's question. I'm just going to sort of have a quick look down through the list. So we've had a nice little thing from Alexandra saying, fantastic talk, Lucy. Thank you for all your dedication, hard work and enthusiasm. NEP is definitely on my must list for 2021. I think that's going to be the case with quite a few people coming in. So we have a question from my dad, actually, who's also joined today. My dad would like to know, will global warming have a significant effect on the UK and the EU flocks? Over to you, Lucy.
So one of the things, it's a really good question. One of the things we're actually seeing with the storks over the last sort of 10 years at least is that we're getting more and more sightings of them here in the UK, and that they are spreading further northwards. So it is possible that it will affect them. Here in the UK, I think it will only affect them positively. They will perhaps, we'll get more bloodlines coming from Europe. I think it may affect their overwintering sites. This is the only sort of real issue, is the lack of food in their overwinter sites because of, you know, extreme drought or extreme rain. You know, the weather conditions can be quite extreme at the moment. And one of the things that they find quite difficult is wet and cold periods during the breeding season. So whilst they're nesting, the chicks can cope with it being cold and the chicks can cope with it being wet, but they can't cope with both at the same time. So it may well have an impact on nesting success, but it's definitely something that we'll be studying over the years.
Okay, thank you. And then we have another question, well, just a comment from Martin Noble saying, thanks, Lucy, a beautifully presented lecture and full of valuable information. So
thank you very much.
It's always nice to hear these positive feedback when you're sort of sitting looking at just yourself. It's a bit different than engaging with a live audience. So brilliant. Definitely. Thanks, everybody, for these really positive comments. Dorothy Butler says, fantastic, thank you. Is there any danger of storks out-competing existing species? Great question.
That's a really good question. And actually, it's something that we don't think is going to happen. We don't think that the storks are going to out-compete any other species in particular because of their wide varied diet, basically, because they don't focus on a particular species that they're predating. We don't think overall it will have a large impact on any other species.
Yeah, good to know. There's plenty of food for them all, especially at those landfill sites.
Yeah, I know. And one of the things that we're hoping, because of the awareness that the storks hopefully can drive, is that we can use them to help restore more ecosystems and provide more food. Obviously, we want to make sure that there's enough food for the storks, but also for all of our existing species as well.
Yeah, enough food to go around.
Yeah.
A quick, not a question from Sarah Henson, but a quick thank you for a fantastic and interesting talk.
Thank you.
And a question for you from Emma Burrows saying, thank you for a very detailed and interesting talk with a smiley face. As white storks are very opportunistic, I was wondering if there's ever any issues with the storks predating the small birds nesting in the sticks of their nests.
Not that I've noticed, actually. So from the data, from the few papers that I've read about the sort of the co-nesting, normally the other birds are nesting quite lower down within that nest, and the storks can't actually get to them themselves. So I haven't actually seen much evidence relating to that. And they I mean, they will occasionally eat birds' eggs and occasionally eat nestlings if they come across them, but most of the time they're foraging on the ground, and yeah, not able to get to the ones in the nest in particular.
Great. And then a really nice one from your mum saying, just to say what a wonder, isn't it nice our parents can join us? We can't see them, but they're here with us. So just to say, what a wonderful talk, so informative, and I'm not biased, even though I am Lucy's mum.
Thanks, Mum.
Yeah, so that's all of the questions that have come through in the Q&A. Oh, hang on, no, there you go, look, another one's just popped in. Phil Jones, oh, this is really lovely, great way to spend time today. It's been a wonderful presentation. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I think there's a few others, Lucy, that you've probably seen in the chat.
Yeah,
just saying
responding.
Yes, I can see it's like yeah, wonderful. Brilliant. I think that's it. I don't think any other questions have popped in. Yeah, okay, so I shall. Sophie, are you still live? Are you still with us?
Oh, just about with you, holding on,
Hanging
by
on.
the lines of internet connection. Thank you, Emma, for answering and facilitating all those questions. That was absolutely brilliant. Lucy, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've just been gripped and fascinated all the way through. And I think just by the chat and the questions and the feedback, we've been really honoured to have you with us today, sharing your immense knowledge.
Thank you so much for having me. Like I say, this year's been a difficult year for public engagement, as the Wildlife Trust will know. And yeah, it's been fantastic to come and share all of the knowledge that we've learned through the last couple of years with the Storks, and hope to come back soon with some more data.
Definitely. On that, actually, it's a perfect segue into, obviously, this is our first of our sort of weekend or evening online talks, which are open to everyone to attend. So do look at our online talks page. Our next talk is on the success of the 10 years of the Red Deer project, which is very exciting. And the January talk is by the urban birder, David Lindo. And we will have many talks going on. And obviously there's the opportunity to engage in our members and volunteer coffee mornings, which run twice a month. And the next one is fully booked already, which is incredible. Just proves that people are really desperate to connect and discuss and share their love of nature. So there's a talk next week, which is fully booked, unfortunately. There is also a fascinating talk or coffee morning with Ken Ancorn, who is our one of our bird experts, and that'll be called Encounters with Owls. Book quickly, because they book up so ridiculously quickly. We will try to accommodate as many people as we can, but obviously for coffee mornings we want it to be a slightly more sort of casual, informal, rather than us talking to a blank screen and then having your lovely messages received via chat. And again, obviously get in touch with Lucy if you're interested in volunteering. I'm sure there'll be quite a few people coming to you. And also we take volunteers too. Sorry, Wildlife Trust. So if you'd like to volunteer with our conservation projects, or become a member and then gain access to exclusive events and coffee mornings and walks when we're able to meet up in public, which we're all looking forward to. Or simply donate. I know some of you did donate to come to this talk today, and thank you so much for doing that. We really appreciate that. Lastly, there will be a short email going out maybe 4 minutes ago now to you saying we would love to hear your feedback on our talks so we can improve our future events. So if you could fill that out, I'd be very grateful. And if you've got the learning bug from today, look at our adult learning pages. Emma Rothwell is one of our amazing tutors, and they are just fascinating. So book up and give yourself a treat of learning more about wildlife this year and next, because this year's been a bit interesting. Thank you. That's all for now. Thank you, Lucy, again. Thank you, Emma. And thank you, Internet Connection, for letting me sign off. I hope you all enjoy today and have a great rest of the day. Bye, everyone.
Bye.